I'm glad you're all here, and I'm going to talk about monk seals and field camps. So we hold assessment and recovery camps in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands every year during the breeding season. So these are our research objectives. Basically, we want to find out the status of the population, document births and deaths and injuries, and collect samples. And we also want to do things that may help to increase survival of the monk seals, such as removing dangerous marine debris and mitigating threats to the seals. And also every year we have some special studies. So what do? It takes a lot of preparation and training to send people out to these remote sites, because once we dump them off, they're going to be out there for maybe 4 months or 5 months all by themselves. And so they have to bring all the water and food and sunscreen and everything that they would need to survive without resupply for that amount of time. So we do training as far as wilderness first aid, data collection, how to handle animals, and just all aspects of their work out there. So this just shows some of our preparations. Now, because the northwestern Hawaiian Islands are very remote, we have strict quarantine protocols because we don't want to introduce any seeds or insects or anything that's not out there. So this just shows most of the things that we pack in buckets, and then if it's freezable, we freeze it for 48 hours, or if not, then we have to bug bomb it. So anyway, we have some really strict protocols because we're trying not to introduce anything that's not out there. So here's loading the ship. And so this just shows the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And this year we had 14 field staff, and they were deployed at 5 different sites. French Frigate Shoals. See if I can show this. Okay, French Frigate Shoals, that's an atoll. Then Laysan Island, Lizansky Island, Prone Hermes Reef, and Curie Atoll. Now, Laysan and Lizansky are single islands, and the rest of them are atolls. There are other sites where we didn't deploy people, and that's mainly because, Necker and, Nihoa and Necker or Mokumanamana are just basically, rocks sticking out of the ocean, very hard to land on and very fragile. So we don't put camps out there, and we just, when the conditions are right, we stop there on our way up or way down on the ship just to do a quick assessment of the population there. And then Midway Atoll, that is a place that has a landing strip, and there are flights out there. So we just send people periodically up there to have shorter field stays, but we don't deploy a whole field camp. We also, at French Frigate Shoals, we had an early camp this year because we wanted to have people out there to try to mitigate. There's a lot of old infrastructure from when the military was out there and the Coast Guard, and it's falling apart. So you have seawalls with gaps and other areas where animals can get entrapped. And so we had people out there early to try to mitigate some of that entrapment. Okay. So this just shows our ships that we usually use to get out there. This year we only used the Oscar Elton SETI both to deploy our camps and to bring our camps back. And so everything is loaded onto the ship, and then when you get to the island, the ship has to have a small boat and crane it down into the water, and then the people and all the supplies go with many, many trips from the ship to shore until you have all the supplies that you need in order to be out there for that amount of time. So this just shows getting onto the small boat and setting up tents and just bringing all the supplies. And down here you can see all the water jugs, because you have to have enough water for both drinking and cooking, and people don't bathe with the water because there wouldn't be enough water, so they generally just bathe in the ocean. And sometimes people will collect rainwater so that they can give their clothes a freshwater rinse after they've washed them in the ocean. So at Lake San Lisiansky and Curie, this is actually incorrect, it's not Pearl and Hermes. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, Lake San Lisiansky and Pearl and Hermes, we have tent camps. And so that means that everybody has their own tent, and then they may also have an office tent and a cook tent. And so there are other sites, French Frigate Shoals and Curie Atoll, that have buildings. And so this shows the upper shot right here is showing French Frigate Shoals. And this shot was taken before the last hurricane. And after the hurricane, we did an overflight and also got satellite photos. And so this structure here and this structure here, it's now gone. A lot of the water tanks are gone, and our tent platforms are gone. And so anyway, and most of these windows have blown out. So we have people up there right now that are from a marine debris cruise that are stopping by, and they're doing a better assessment on the ground and trying to maybe collect some of the debris that is all over the island at the moment. And down here, you can see this is Curie Atoll, and that also has some buildings. And these buildings are left over from when the Coast Guard was up there many years ago. So at French Frigate Shoals and Pearl and Hermes, those are atolls that require boats to get to all the different islets. And so this just shows some of the shots of people zipping around the atoll in boats. So some of the special projects we did this year, besides assessing the population and trying to save seals, was we had some UAS studies. And this was on the deployment cruise. We had some pilots go out and just, take some pictures, because we're just developing this as a tool so that, for instance, when we go to a place like Nihoa or Mokumanamana where we can't always land because of the rough weather, maybe we can get a complete count using the UAS. And we're also doing a study for photogrammetry, which means measuring the animals using photographs. And so we're just trying to be able to see whether we can take photographs from up above and assess whether the condition of the animal is fat or thin or whatever. We also did some foraging and habitat use studies up there. The picture on the left shows some satellite images from a satellite tag that was deployed during the cruise that took out the camps. And we also tried some tags that were mounted on flipper tags at Pearl and Hermes. So this is just some of the information they got from that. We also are doing debris plots to see what is the accumulation rate of debris. And so we clean off, there's a lot of marine debris out in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, just because of the way the Pacific gyre just sort of concentrates debris right around the Hawaiian archipelago, unfortunately. And so this just shows a plot before it was cleaned and after it was cleaned. And so we've done this for several years just to see, how debris is accumulating. And we're also doing vaccinations for sort of a distemper called morbillivirus. And so we're trying to vaccinate all the seals up in the northwestern and the main Hawaiian Islands, just in case this kind of a distemper comes to the islands. And it's not here now, but there are other kinds of, cetaceans have had this kind of morbillivirus. here in the Hawaiian Islands, and so we just don't want seals to get it, because in other areas of the world we've had massive die-offs from seals getting sick with this. So some of the interventions that we do to save seals: we disentangle them if they get entangled in debris, or if they're entrapped, we try to get them out. We also translocate seals from areas where there's a lot of danger from sharks or aggressive males to lower risk areas. Sometimes when they're born, their umbilical cord doesn't detach, and so we have to go and snip it. And sometimes the mothers and pups get separated from each other, and we reunite them, or they may get infections and big abscesses that we treat. Sometimes males will be aggressive, and so we have to displace them away from an animal if they're being aggressive towards it. And also we try to collect all the dangerous debris that we can and bring it back by ship to H-Power and burn it up. So the longer seasons that we have, the more seals we can save, because a lot of these things just happen on occasion. And so if you happen to be there at the right time, then you can save a seal. So this just shows at French Frigate Shoals, the seawall is falling apart, and so it's actually sort of like the teeth of a comb. And so the little pups just like to ride in, into one of those gaps on a wave, and then they can't find their way out. So this just shows two of our field researchers this year. They've gotten a pup in a stretcher net, and they're going to take it out and free it in the ocean. And then down here, you can see another one of our field researchers is trying to close a gap using sort of fencing, just so that the animals won't go in and then get confused as to how to get out again. So this is a major undertaking at French Frigate Shoals. And here you can see other animals that also get entangled or entrapped. Right here, you can see a green sea turtle is being released, who got trapped in the seawall. And here's a Laysan albatross that also got caught in some of the debris that's at French Frigate Shoals. So they, every day, would do an entrapment walk to just look and try to find animals to free. And there were quite a few. Now this is something interesting. A couple times we've had animals actually get trapped in the reef. And this was at Lisiansky this year, and this pup got caught in sort of a pocket of the reef in a hole and couldn't get out for quite some time. Luckily, it did get out before the tide rose so far that it would drown. But we have had animals get drowned when they got caught in just a little hole in the reef. And this is something interesting. Pup got an eel in its nose, and we've had this happen in all the years we've studied the Hawaiian monk seal. We never saw this happen until 3 years ago, and we saw it once, and then the next year we had it happen again, and then this year we had it happen. So for 3 years in a row, it's always the right nostril, and it's always a pup, and I have no idea why this is happening. So this just shows all the interventions we did this year, and there was 75. Most of the interventions were at French Frigate Shoals, and that's because we do a lot of translocations of pups as soon as they're weaned from the areas where there are a lot of sharks to an area where there aren't so many sharks. Yes, I'll answer your, what?
What is the marine debris on the beaches?
Well, it's partly because people throw trash into the ocean, or maybe a fisherman loses their net when they're out at sea. So there are a lot of different reasons for that. But we have to be careful so that we don't make more marine debris. So on their way, when we picked up most of our camps, we also collected 2 seals for rehabilitation. These were little pups that didn't nurse long enough, and so they were undersized. And so they're undergoing treatment at Monkseal Hospital on the Big Island right now. So this just as a summary of animals that have been rehabilitated at Kaiola, which is the Monkseal Hospital in Kona. And so we've done, since 2014 when it started, 26 seals have been rehabilitated. And 22 of those have been released, in previous years, and 4 seals have been treated this year, 2 from the main Hawaiian Islands and those 2 from the northwestern Hawaiian Islands that I just showed you pictures of. And one of the pups from the main Hawaiian Islands was just released last week, back to its natal beach on Molokai. And one remains, and then the 2 that we just brought back are still at the hospital. So in all, with all those interventions we did this year and all the other years, over 1,000 interventions have taken place. And we did an analysis to see what our effect of all these little things that we've done. And if you look at the animals that are alive today, and they're in the progeny of the ones that were rehabilitated or otherwise helped, 28% of the population is here today because of some of these little interventions that happened. So we say that this success is due to multiple silver BBs, little BBs for survival. So we're just getting our camps back. Yes?
Your intervention goes south.
I can't think of one right now, but whenever you're handling an animal, then there are risks involved, and sometimes an animal might be, for instance, disentangled, and then you don't see it again later. So, so yes, maybe some of them could go south, but most of them don't. So this shows the preliminary 2018 population summaries. And so the data is still in its preliminary stage, but you can see how many animals are at each location. And Laysan Island has the highest subpopulation, and French Frigate Shoals is the next highest. However, French Frigate Shoals had the most pups. And survival has been fairly good from last year to this year, without a lot of difference in the survival rates between the different locations. Highest survival from last year to this year was at the Zansky. So this just shows when we stopped at Nihoa and Mokumanamana, we were able to do a few surveys. And so these are the animals that we saw in May at both sites, and at Nihoa in September, we weren't able to stop with our ship because there was Hurricane Olivia was coming close. And so we just went on by. However, there was another group that was at Nihoa and then also left, but they were able to count, and they counted 5 pups there in September. So some noteworthy events that happened this year that are not totally seal related. We had a tropical storm, Hector, that came through. It was a hurricane, but then by the time it reached the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and went past the sites where our people were, it was a tropical storm. However, everybody had to take measures to shelter in place, and this just shows right here a tent that's been dropped so that it won't fly away if there's heavy weather. It didn't turn out to be as bad as we thought it might, but we were taking precautions. Another thing happened is that we lost Trig Islet at French Frigate Shoals, and this is one of the very major pupping locations. And it had been declining for several years, and then this year we lost it. And then with Hurricane Malaka, we also lost East Island. And those were the two major pupping sites at French Frigate. So this shows the loss. This was Trig Island, taken the day before it was lost. And I was actually there when this picture was taken, and there were 3 mother pup pairs on the island. And then when we were watching, a huge pregnant female came up, and we were just like, no, don't pup there. And then the next day it was gone. And the females showed up later at Turn Island, which is the island where all the people are, but their pups were never seen again. So I think their pups didn't make it. And then we were worried about the pregnant female because we didn't know whether she'd pupped or not before the island was lost. But luckily then she showed up at Turn Island, and she pupped successfully. So that was good, at least. And then, so that happened September 9th. And then when Hurricane Malacca went through, that was in early October. And we got the satellite images, and you may have seen this on the news, but East Island was decimated. The upper picture shows East Island before the hurricane, and you can see there's vegetation on the island, and the turtle group, who also is embedded with the monkseal group at French Frigate Shoals, usually is camping up there because that's the primary site for turtle nesting in the Hawaiian Islands. Well, French Frigate Shoals is, and 50% of all the nesting occurs at East Island. And so here you can see after the hurricane, there's just a little sandbar, and it's actually sort of outside of the original dimensions of East Island. And we had somebody go on a Coast Guard flight on last Saturday just to take pictures, and there were a bunch of seals hauled up on this little sandbar. But between Trig and East Island, that's where 60% of all the pups are born at the French Frigate Shoals. So that's significant, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens next year and the years after. And so this also shows Turn Island. Now, we picked up all the camps except for French Frigate Shoals in September. And French Frigate Shoals, our people were staying out later because pupping occurs later at French Frigate Shoals. And I didn't mention it, but East did have one nursing pup at the time that it was probably lost. But anyway, because of the hurricane was coming, then we had, luckily there was a ship that could pick up our people early. And the upper picture here shows Turn Island before the hurricane, and you can see that there's a runway, an old runway that no longer works, and a lot of vegetation, and here are our tent platforms, and there was like a boathouse here, and there's like a warehouse where people live. And after the hurricane, you can just see that a lot of water must have gone over the island because all the vegetation is covered, and there's a lot more beach real estate, I guess you'd say, and several of the buildings are gone. So in summary, we deployed 14 people at 5 sites, and we did 75 interventions, and we brought 2 seals to Keikaiola, and we vaccinated a lot of seals, and everyone came home safely, all the people. Okay, that's it. Yes?
Where is Mokumanamana?
That's right after Nihoa. It's going up the chain. There's Nihoa, then Nihoa, and then Mokumanamana. It's also been called Necker. You might have heard that name, right? And then after that, it's French Frigate Shoals.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes?
What happens during the year when people aren't out there to the animals and birds? And
Well, we don't know. We worry about that as far as all the entrapments go. And that's why we wanted to have an earlier camp this year to try to, disentangle more animals. As far as seals go, most of the entrapments are of weaned pups because they're very curious and they're likely to get into anything that they can. But yeah, so earlier in the season, a lot of the entrapments were albatross and a lot of birds, and then as the season went on, it was more and more seals that got entrapped. Yes?
The 2 pups that were picked up, will you wait until next season to bring them back? Will you make that a special trip?
It just depends on what's possible. We might have to wait until we set out our camps next year, but we'll just have to see how they're doing and what's possible. We might, last year we released an animal at Midway Atoll because there's, a runway there. And so one of the seals that had been brought back the previous year was released last fall at Midway. Yes?
After the hurricane, did all the water go back into the sea, or is it still all flooded?
It went back into the sea.